Hello again, everybody out there and cyberspace or YouTube or wherever you are, and the wonderful people who are here to engage with us in questions about uh, our class. This is Marxist-Humanist Initiative. It's our third class on Henryk Grossman's breakdown model and breakdown theory. If you missed parts 1 or 2, I hope you've watched them on YouTube. You should definitely do that because this class is for questions on the readings and on Grossman and on Marxist humanism. Today's class will again be led by Andrew Kliman, whose articles on Grossman, the foundation for his presentations, are published in MHI's online publication with Sober Senses. And we also have with us today some of the discussants we had earlier and questions and comments from the audience. As we discussed previously, you may be wondering why we do not have a pro-Grossman discussant. The reason is simple. We invited a number of people to debate Kliman after his articles were published, and they all refused, except for Ted Reese, who did appear in our podcast, Radio Free Humanity. Today, after 94 years, Grossman's breakdown theory continues to have a grip on many purported Marxists, both activists and academics. But Kliman's writings make a strong case that, far from Grossman having added to Marx's theory of crisis with his model, he instead contradicts Marxist theories and invites readers to draw fatalistic conclusions about overcoming capitalism. If this is the case, then Grossman created one more hurdle in thought that revolutionary masses have to overcome in order to release their own power and creativity. It is our duty to critique such theories. So we are sponsoring these classes in order to break an embargo against considering Kliman's analysis. Much of the so-called left disparages Marxist humanism with name-calling, not with debate. MHI, on the contrary, believes in the widest possible discussion and debate about Marxism, not for scholastic reasons, but as a way to keep Marx alive, to develop Marxism for the 21st century, and to provide theoretical resources to workers and other mass movements against capitalism. Andrew Kliman is Professor Emeritus of Economics at Pace University in New York and the author of 2 books, Reclaiming Marxist Capital, A Refutation of the Myth of Inconsistency, and the second book is The Failure of Capitalist Production, Underlying Causes of the Great Recession. And he's written dozens of journal articles and other peer-reviewed publications, and he writes often for MHI's online journal with Sober Senses. So welcome, Andrew, and take it away.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks to everybody who's returned for a third session. I want to emphasize that my main goal in doing this third class is to engage with participants, especially participants who were not designated discussants. We ran short on time, and because of that, it's likely that there wasn't enough time to answer questions of the participants who weren't discussants, to respond to their comments, and just basically to have discussion with the participants. And I want to make sure that we have that time today. So I'm going to go first. I'll say a few additional things for 15, 20 minutes or so at the start. But after that, the floor is open for your questions, your comments, and for discussion. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, last time I talked about my proof that Marxist value theory implies that the ratio of circulating constant capital to new value, C divided by N, converges. That ratio converges. It does not rise without limit. Okay. What that means then is that Marxist theory implies that there is no Grossman-style breakdown tendency. Okay, but I didn't discuss why this C over N ratio of constant capital to new value, I didn't discuss why it converges, and I want to try to give an intuitive explanation now. Okay, C divided by N must converge because newly accumulated capital in terms of value, capital value, is a portion of the latest period's profit. So the growth of capital value is constrained by the growth of profit. In the long run, capital value cannot grow more rapidly than profit, no matter how much physical means of production increase. As the share of profit that's accumulated approaches its maximum value, which could be 100%, right, all of it, or some lower practical limit, the growth rate of capital value approaches the growth rate of profit. Okay, so it doesn't grow faster in the long run. Now, if that's not intuitive enough for you, I mean, that's okay. People's intuitions differ. What's intuitive to different people differs. So if you got different intuitions, consider the following. A 10-year-old kid, he gets an allowance, and he spends his allowance on gummy bears and baseball cards. And it's possible that his accumulation of baseball cards, the technical term they use is baseball card collection. It's possible that his baseball card collection can grow faster than his allowance increases for a while. He just needs to cut down on his gummy bear consumption and spend more of his allowance on baseball cards. And maybe he can tap into birthday money he saved and money from when he and his friends knocked over the liquor store. But eventually, in the long run, his savings have run out and he's gone cold turkey on gummy bears. And from that point on, his baseball card collection cannot grow any faster than his allowance increases. Okay, so I'm going to go back and share my screen once again. And there we go. Here we go. Okay, so I want to discuss empirical evidence a bit. Last time I discussed the fact that an ever higher ratio of constant to variable capital, which is basically like, it's C divided by V, which is basically like C divided by N in the Bauer-Grossman model, because V is a constant proportion of N. Okay, I discussed the fact that an ever higher C divided by V value composition of capital is not sufficient for a breakdown or for a tendency to break down. The rise in constant to variable capital, C divided by V, for a breakdown, it has to be a permanent rise and it has to be an unlimited rise. Okay, so the question is, what can empirical evidence tell us about whether the rising C divided by V is both permanent and unlimited? Okay, so I got 5 points to make about this. First point, given Marx's theory, if Marx's theory is correct, then there is no breakdown. No empirical evidence can contradict that. So if Marx's theory is right, then what my proof shows is that there is no breakdown and there is no use discussing empirical evidence further. Okay? But Marx's theory might not be right. Okay? So what we're talking about when we talk about empirical evidence now is let's assume that there's something wrong with Marx's theory. Okay? Then what kind of light does the empirical evidence show? What kind of light does the empirical evidence shine on this issue of whether there's a breakdown? Basically, it's next to nothing. First of all, empirical evidence could never tell us that a rise in the value composition, constant divided by variable capital, no evidence could ever tell us that that rise is permanent. The future can't be known with certainty. Fatalists claim that breakdown is inevitable, that it must occur, but that's just faith-based rhetoric. They can't prove that it must occur, and they know that they can't prove that it must occur. So they do something very clever. They say, oh, this is a prediction. Okay? But it's a rather peculiar kind of prediction. Say, it's not a scientific prediction. For instance, Michael Roberts wrote about a decade ago, capitalism cannot continue indefinitely, but must reach its limits, then break down. And he and Guglielmo Carcati, the following year, wrote that if we cannot predict the inevitability of the tendential fall in the rate of profit, and thus of crises, we deprive labor's fight of its objective ground. So they call their statement about inevitability of breakdown a prediction, but it's a weird kind of prediction. It's generally recognized, I think universally recognized, that untestable predictions that cannot be tested, untestable predictions lie outside of the realm of science. What they're calling a prediction is definitely untestable. It definitely lies outside the realm of science. Okay, consider this. Imagine that capitalism breaks down. Okay, so capitalism breaks down, then the evidence confirms a prediction that capitalism will break down. But that's not still confirming a so-called prediction that breakdown is inevitable. What evidence could confirm a so-called prediction of inevitable breakdown? A prediction that capitalism would have broken down under all possible conditions. There is no such evidence. There can't be any. Evidence about what have happened under counterfactual conditions, there is no such evidence. Okay, so the so-called prediction is not testable, and therefore it's not scientific. Okay, that was my second point. Let me stop sharing for a second. No, I think I got to keep sharing. Okay, third point. It's extremely unlikely that empirical evidence could determine whether C divided by V rises without limit or whether it approaches a limit. Okay, here I've taken that same curve we looked at before, where the ratio of C divided by V goes up from 12 to 24. I fuzzed it up a bit because real life data is a little bit fuzzy, probably a lot more fuzzy than what I'm depicting here. And I've taken a 150-year time span, and that blue line in front of the red dots, that's the actual regression line. So that's the line of best fit linearly to these data, and it actually does better than a curvy, slightly better than a curvy fit for the central tendency of these data. So 150 years of data, nobody's got that in reality, but even if we had 150 years of data, it's not likely we could be able to discriminate between a constant growth of C divided by V, which is, what the Grossman breakdown prediction needs, if not a exponential growth. You wouldn't be able to distinguish between that or a declining rate of growth leading to, in other words, an eventual limiting point. So not an unlimited growth of C divided by V. The evidence just is not going to be there to tell us which it is. Okay, my fourth point. Just as evidence that C divided by V rises is not sufficient evidence that breakdown will occur, neither is any of the other evidence that fatalists and breakdown buffs wave around. I mean, for instance, Michael Roberts was recently, waving around a graph of the fall in the rate of profit. In his book, Ted Reese does similar stuff and a lot of other evidence. Okay, but the evidence that they put forward is just not sufficient for reasons I'll explain to substantiate the claim that capitalism is headed to breakdown. So I produced an example here. It's a reproduction scheme, much like those that accompany my 2021 article on Grossman, but this one's got some fixed capital in it, a little bit of fixed capital. For simplicity, I made the fixed capital physically non-depreciating, and that's in order not to have to deal with issues of whether you count depreciation at current or historical costs. Okay, I've got the means of production, MP, growing at an annual rate of 3% per year. New value, okay, the surplus value, the variable capital both grow at 1% per year. The ratio of means of production to output X, that rises slightly over time from 1 to 1.25. That's the so-called capital output ratio, and I got some initial values. Okay, so what are the results? Value, variable capital grow by 1%, ratio of surplus value to variable capital, rate of surplus value is constant, get a slightly rising ratio of physical means of production to output X, and let's look at some of the results. Okay, graph number 1. Okay, what we're going to see in the first 3 graphs is a bunch of stuff that is consistent with the story that the fatalists and breakdown buffs, the people who hold to Grossman's theory, tell us. This stuff is consistent with what they say, okay, but it's not enough. It doesn't confirm their story. It doesn't say that their theory does better than some other theories. Okay, for instance, like Marxist theory, which doesn't say, that there's going to break down or that the share of surplus value accumulated is going to surpass 100%. So you get a rising ratio of means of production to output that's built in. Graph number 1. The amount of living labor you need to produce a unit of physical output that goes down, down, down. Okay, the rate of profit falls, falls, falls. All of that is consistent with the breakdown theory. Okay, but it's consistent with other things as well, like Marxist theory. So it doesn't go to confirm the theory. And putting it in a different way, the first 3 graphs there they do not imply that there will be a breakdown. Okay, and in fact, in this example, there is not a breakdown. As graph 4 shows, the share of surplus value that capitalists accumulate goes up and up and up, but it doesn't exceed doesn't reach 100%. So they're not spending all of their surplus value, on new accumulation of capital. They got stuff left over for their own, financial investment and consumption revenue. Okay, so in the Grossman model, you'd have to go above 100% to have a breakdown. That's when you'd have a breakdown. Okay, you don't have that here. And the ratio of constant to variable capital, value composition of capital, it rises, but it doesn't rise without limit. You continue on. I've gone to 1,000 periods here. You keep going on, it rises to about 86. And graph number 6. Recall Grossman's argument that the accumulation of an ever greater share of surplus value causes the capitalist revenue, the portion of the surplus value they don't accumulate, okay, ever greater share of value being accumulated means that the revenue declines. And that provokes, according to Grossman, an economic crisis and an economic downturn. But none of that's happening here because the capitalist revenue is not falling. It's, even though the percentage of surplus value being accumulated goes up and up and up, so does the absolute amount of revenue that the capitalists have. Okay, so that's my fourth point about evidence. They show us evidence, but they don't show us the crucial evidence about what would discriminate between their theory and other theories. Okay, so finally, let's look at some actual evidence. Grossman's alleged breakdown tendency, which is about surplus value not being enough eventually to allow accumulation to continue at the assumed rate, that's specifically about the part of constant capital that circulates annually. It's not about the fixed capital, but it's specifically about the circulating part of the constant capital. And the alleged breakdown tendency requires that the annually circulating constant capital becomes a bigger and bigger share of the total value of output, as we've talked about. Okay, here is evidence, you've seen this before, for the last 75 years in the United States, the closest empirical proxies to the total price or value of output and the circulating constant capital share of that. Okay, it's really very narrow fluctuations between 50 and 55% the whole time, no trend, nothing. Except if you look between 1972 and 1986, you see a bit of a upward blip that's fairly consistent, followed by a rather steep fall. As these things go, we're only talking about a few percentage points. Okay, so here's another way of just looking at that little period there. Somebody could argue that this slight upward blip in the 70s, followed by the down turn in the early 1980s, they could argue that this meant that the breakdown tendency was operating and it triggered a crisis, just as Grossman said. But the evidence does not seem to support that claim either. This upward blip in the 70s seems to have been driven by rising inflation. So it's, again, that same little window between 72 and 1986. And the orange line is the rate of inflation of gross output. And so what happened is, when the rate of inflation of gross output goes up, also the share of the total price of output that represents circulating constant capital, that went up. Why? Basically because inflation of means of production was faster than consumption good inflation. Okay, I want to end by engaging with a couple of points that Alan Freeman made in his discussing comments. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about I'm not really happy with the answer I gave Sebastian last time about the political implications of my proof and such, but we can talk about that. Um, okay, so at one point in his discussing comments, Alan said, quote, if we wish the schemists to form the basis for a general theory that is an explanation of how capitalism reproduces itself, I think we need to interrogate the simplification that the physical magnitude of output is a meaningful idea. But I have strong doubts about using Marx's reproduction schemes as distinct from his theory of capitalist reproduction. I've got strong doubts about using the schemes as the basis for a general theory of capitalist reproduction. And let me explain why. They weren't constructed for that purpose. As I've mentioned, the stated purpose of Marx's schemes was to show that Adam Smith and the others who followed him were wrong when they claimed that accumulation of constant capital trickles down, so that additional constant capital investment ultimately becomes additional variable capital that boosts wages, benefits, employment, and such. And it's very clear that this was Marx's purpose. It's there in chapter 19 of volume 2, former presentations of the subject. It's all about this. It's there in volume 1 when Marx discusses expanded reproduction. That's chapter 24, section 2. Exactly this issue of what happens ultimately to constant capital investment. And to tackle this issue, Marx's schemes are very well suited to this. That's not surprising. That's what they were constructed to do, was to tackle it. You can trace the growth of constant capital and of means of production from year to year, and you can see where the additional amounts go. And they all expand the capital of Department 1 or the capital of Department 2, and they never trickle down as variable capital. Case closed. Okay, now, in these schemes, there are numerous simplifying assumptions. Constant prices, no technical change, there's no finance, et cetera, et cetera. And the simplifications, I don't think, do any harm in Marx's discussion, because those simplifications are not very relevant to the specific question he was answering. But in other contexts, like in a general theory, they're very problematic. Okay, or take the idea that Marx divided everything into two and only two departments: production of means of production, production of consumption goods. That's exactly the way to address the specific question he was answering. You know, does the accumulation of capital go into production of means of production, or does it go into consumption production? So that's exactly the right way to think about the total social capital if you're addressing Marx's question. But I got strong doubts that it's the best way to address a lot of other questions. So the problem is, I think, you know, in terms of theory and interpretation, okay, the purpose of Marx's schemes is very clear, but his purpose has been forgotten, or his purpose has been ignored. And in recent decades, you know, going on 40 years now, almost everybody has said that what the schemes are about is modeling a system in equilibrium. And then they debate whether Marx's point was that real-life capitalism does tend to equilibrium, or whether his point was to show how implausible equilibrium is. But as I've tried to suggest, what Marx was doing was not about either of those things. So why has there been such consistent mischaracterization of Marx's schemes? I think it's because the people who have been talking about and using the schemes really haven't cared much about the question that he was trying to answer. So they've created a Marx who answers their own questions. First, they've been preoccupied with the issue of whether a market economy or a planned economy is better. And reproduction schemes that are about equilibrium or disequilibrium in market economies, that's right up their alley, right? Secondly, these people are preoccupied with income distribution. They've got, a fervently redistributionist politics almost all the time. Okay, now Marx was trying to smash trickle-down ideology with his schemes. Doesn't trickle down to the constant capital investment, doesn't trickle down to the workers. But his argument wasn't about income distribution between people, capitalists and workers. It was about workers suffering, not because profit goes into the pockets of the rich. It was about them suffering because profit goes to expand constant capital. And that's just not something redistributionists care much about. And thirdly, Marx's argument is about the negative effects of investment in constant capital on the working class. But the modern interpreters have largely been pro-investment, pro-technology. They more or less want the same kind of economy we have now, except with the redistribution of income and planning and state ownership. But this issue of, accumulation going to expand capital, and not the working class, that it doesn't do much for them. Okay, as you'll notice from the thing that I quoted from Alan, he also stressed the difference between use values and physical quantities. And he indicated that Marx said that, at the beginning of Capital, he was talking about use value, not physical quantities. I read it very different. Marx said right at the start of the first volume that use value doesn't dangle in midair. It's conditioned by the commodity's physical properties. And so the use value or useful thing is the commodity body itself, or the physical body of the commodity itself is translated as a loaf of bread, a computer processor of such and such speed, and so forth. Okay, now I agree with Alan that physical things that have the same name, like cars, aren't identical, and their properties change over time. Absolutely correct. Car today, physically different from a car 60 years ago. Okay, but as Alan also pointed out, the total price of a product like cars, like the car industry, the total price of its output, that's the price per car times the quantity of cars. So if we want to discuss the price of cars, we're logically committed to there being a quantity of cars. And if we agree about that, then I think the differences are mostly semantic, what we want to call that quantity. If we say the quantity of cars is a physical quantity, that's not literally correct. The cars differ physically, okay? But saying that it's a quantity of use value also isn't literally correct. The cars are different kinds of use values. They got different uses. Most cars are used to get to work and to shop. Some are used for, Sunday pleasure drives. Some are used as a means of production. Taxi cabs, company cars, pizza delivery. So I think, what we're talking about is not something that can be literally described as either physical quantities or use value. And I will end there, and everything is open for comments and questions and discussion.
I don't know if people are expecting me to come in first.
Andrew, do you want us to put everything on the chat, or questions and
You can
comments?
put on the chat, or if people want to click on a, what do you call it? The hand, to raise their hand to be recognized, using voice and video, or one or the other, or both. Well, not just the video, right?
Do sign language.
Yeah, so come in however you want.
Can I come in verbally? Do I need to
Sure.
raise my hand first?
Yeah.
Okay. That was very enlightening on a few subjects. But I wonder if you would talk a little more. You mentioned that you had begun to talk with Sebastian about I forgot what I was about to say, about why people go for
his question was about what are the political implications of my proof that there's no breakdown according to Marxist theory. That's how I have it in my notes.
right, but you had talked a little bit about the political prejudices or implications that make people go for Grossman's theory and breakdown instead of Marx's. So I'd like to know a little more about what you think that is. And secondly, conversely, what are the implications of Marx's own theory for political action?
Right. This is a huge topic, and I think maybe others will want to come in. I'll just be very brief. I wasn't fully satisfied with my answer because I gave an answer that conforms to my understanding of, kind of politics that I try to practice. So I said, I'm trying to get people interested in Marxist theory, which has been confused with Grossman. They think they like Marx, but what they like is Grossman. People haven't given Marx a shot. And also, everything I'm doing is a challenge to fatalism. I'm not sure if that was the intended meaning of, what are the political implications. What my work, what my proof does not do is say, here's what's got to be the case, right? It's against something that says that. So what it does is it leaves possibilities open. It opens up possibilities that have been closed. So it does not direct us in the way that something would direct us if it were like, okay, capitalism is about to collapse and we have to organize, for the final battle between, capitalism and barbarism or something like that. So by itself, it doesn't do much. Together with Marxist theory, which it opens space for, I think it gives us an ability, together with Marxist theory, to understand a crisis-ridden system that cannot ever solve its own crises, except for a time. But because there is no automatic breakdown or automatic tendency to break down either, what we have is a future that is influenced in a fundamental way by what human beings do, what social classes do, what individuals do, their ideas, their thinking, and so forth. I really can't do much better than that. I'm just one of these people that's much more comfortable with critique than proposing solutions, because most proposed solutions are wrong. Critique has a much better track record.
Other people may want to comment on what form of fatalism they have encountered in their dealings with the left or participation in movements against capitalism, and what drawbacks there were, and how Marx opens up a different path. Or they may not want to talk about it.
Yeah. We got something in the chat from Seth Mobile. It's probably Seth on a mobile device. And he writes, the last graph of empirical data, which doesn't show a breakdown tendency, could the growth and decline you pointed out from 1972 to 86, those are the right dates, yes, be explained in whole or in part by the green revolution in global agricultural productivity, industrialization and growth in constant circulating capital, and the subsequent global oil crisis? I'm not sure about the former. I kind of doubt it because my graph is for the United States, and changes in global agricultural productivity are not going to have much influence on the economy of the United States except in agriculture. Okay, now that's unless you're counting the oil industry as agricultural. Okay, because the second part of what you said, the subsequent global oil crisis, yeah. What goes on between 72 and 86 with regard to inflation has absolutely everything to do with the global oil crisis. In particular, after the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, you've got I think it's called OPEC-1. I think that was OPEC-1. Okay, so the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, they restrict supply, oil prices go up, way up. And that affected, prices at the gas pump. The thing is, it affected prices of means of production even more. And it's partly because there's a lot of trucking and stuff used in industry to get things from here to there. Supplies, finished products, and so forth. But also, the rising oil prices boosted land valuations. And the rising land valuations, that's part of this, or at least the something connected to the land valuations gets figured somehow into this intermediate inputs, maybe some depreciation or whatever it is. So yeah, that has everything to do with what's going on here. I mean, that's why I knew, okay, I see that blip, between 72 up to about 80, then it goes down again. Okay, so immediately I suspected, this had to do with inflation because I know about inflation at the time. And when I wrote my book on the Great Recession, I researched this issue of the prices of means of production going up faster. So I suspected that was what was behind this. And, so I put together that graph, and it looks like, it's not a perfect fit, but it looks like a plausible explanation of what was going on. But maybe I'm not fully understanding the green revolution and agricultural productivity. Maybe maybe I've gotten that wrong. Seth Mobile says, no, I think you got it. Are you Seth on a mobile, or is your last name Mobile? Well, we're waiting for the answer, which is a very important question, right? I'm on my mobile device. Okay. AFRE, or AFRE, AFRE, says, I have a minor technical question just for clarification. In the chart giving the ratio of constant capital to output, I may have heard wrong. It sounded as if you were confining the data to circulating constant capital. But I think I must have heard wrong because you state that constant capital is calculated as output less value added. If this includes depreciation, we be talking about total constant capital. Okay. That last set of graphs, which is what I call the circulating constant capital share of the total price of output or something. It's counting the price of raw materials and other means of production that are used up within the year using annual data. It also includes the annual depreciation of fixed capital. Okay, because although it's fixed capital, the depreciation circulates. Okay, in other words, the in accounting terms, the capital, the accumulated capital gets reduced by the amount of depreciation, and the depreciation becomes a formative element of the price of the product or the value. So, it's arguable, but that's one way of measuring the amount of constant capital value that circulates. So what I meant to say by not inclusive of fixed capital is I'm not looking at the total value of capital compared to the total price of output. I'm looking at the total price of, I'm looking at the total value of capital minus the capital that remains fixed at the end of the year as a percentage of the total price of output. Okay, why am I doing it that way? Because this is the measure that conforms most closely to what Grossman was looking at. Okay, the C that he was talking about is all of the value that passes into the price of the product or value of the product. Okay, and then the total price of output. So it's this measure that I think is the closest to what he was talking about. And this is what would have to rise to, really, really, really high levels if Grossman were right, that there's going to be a breakdown because the increase in this thing, this kind of constant capital in the next year would have to exhaust all of the surplus value, but we're nowhere near that. We're running 50-55%, and there doesn't seem to be any trend in the US except for that a bit of a blip in the 70s and early 80s, and that really is a blip that seems to be driven by disproportionately rapid inflation of means of production and not any kind of Grossmanite compulsion to accumulate more and more. Okay, so A-free or A-free or something says, so wouldn't it be better to describe it as constant capital turned over? Perhaps. What I tried to do was to avoid unnecessary multiplication of technical terms. So I said circulating, not turned over, but yeah, that's fine. Oh, I believe A-free is Alan Freeman. Alan Freeman, do you believe A-free is you?
I'm told that I am. Microsoft says I
Okay.
am.
Okay.
I think I can change my name, but I'm happy with A-free.
A-free. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I try to minimize use of technical terms because, it's just hard. I have a training as an economist, and the way you learn, and the way you learn especially to teach, is no matter what the hell you're talking about, it's either a factor that moves the supply curve or it's a factor that moves the demand curve. So all reality can be jammed into two curves no matter what you're talking about. So that's kind of my training.
Andrew, can I cut in with a question?
Absolutely.
So just to go back to what the question that you had written down, that from Sebastian and Anne's question about it. My question is, in going over the math and now looking at some of Grossman's work for the first time. I've never actually read Grossman himself. I've read Grossmanites. The math is so important to Grossman. It's central to it. And when you come along and point out the flaws in the math, my question is, why, if I were a fatalist, I wouldn't grab on to Grossman, right? Why hold on to something that has this math that can be refuted or undercut so pointedly by you? I would grab onto something else. So what is it about Grossman's work that appeals to the fatalists? Why are they always using Grossman and not some other figure, or is it, do they like the veneer of respectability that comes with the amount of math, and they think most people won't do the work to look at it through, and it kind of gives them a pass? I've been puzzling over this, because the math is central to Grossman's point. He's not saying, I might be wrong here, but my argument still would stand. No, it's all or nothing.
Right. Okay, so you're saying in light of my article, why are they still holding on to Grossman, right?
I mean, even before your article, I think it's pretty clear
Right.
from what I know about Grossmanites and the ones I've encountered, they don't really truly engage with this part of Grossman, whereas it's
Right.
core
Okay.
to what Grossman is doing. So why
Right.
even use him? Why call themselves, why champion his cause and not some other fatalist,
Right.
cause?
Well, there is some of that. I mean, Robert Kurtz, the late Robert Kurtz, he died not long ago in Germany. He had a following in Germany, maybe elsewhere. I mean, he just said, look, the Grossman stuff doesn't work. I don't know why exactly he thought it doesn't work. So he says, Grossman was right about, the breakdown of the system, but, his actual theory doesn't work, and there's Kurtz has some sort of following. To some extent, I think you're right. There's a fascination with the breakdown math. And I mean, I think I can understand it because I'm like fascinated by growth rates, right? I mean, I'm just fascinated by that. But I mean, I remember, way back when, this was mid late 1980s, and there was a guy who went to graduate school with me. He later became a very, very well-known autonomous Marxist. But he had these notebooks, and he was just playing with these Grossman graphs of, when the breakdown is, and it wasn't even like the equations. It was the graphs. I think it's at some level, it's people wanting a predictive device. Why there's still people holding on to Grossman after my, article of a couple of years ago, etc. Well, it hasn't gotten a huge play. We know how people, come to commitments, how it's hard once they've come to commitments to shake them off. So a lot of it might be inertia. I don't know. Maybe other people have other ideas or a better handle on the situation than I do. Ravi Bali has his hand raised. So how do we? Okay, we're going to ask you to unmute. And can he put on his own video, Gabriel?
Yeah, he should be able to unmute and turn on his own video on his own, actually. But we can ask you. Yeah, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can't see you yet.
No, that's fine. You don't need to see me. As
I've
someone
seen you before.
Yeah, you have. There's nothing much to see. As
That's
someone
not true at all.
As someone who sort of I didn't call myself a Grossmanite. I thought Grossman was an adequate summarization of Marx. And for the previous organization I belonged to, which was the RCP in the UK, their argument was that you can have a necessity for revolution and a possibility of revolution, and unless you can prove that the system is headed for breakdown, then there is no absolute necessity for it. That was the argument that went along with accepting Grossman's presentation of the breakdown tendency, that without that, it just becomes a matter of choice as to whether revolution is needed or not. And I think that's the the main reason that people gravitate towards Grossman as showing the necessity for revolution, because the system itself cannot be sustained. Over.
Yeah, what do you think about that? First of all, what do you think about just in the nuts and bolts logic of the argument?
Of Grossman's argument? Or
no, the argument of the RCP UK back when.
Well, I was already convinced of the need for transforming society just from a subjective sense that things had to be different. This couldn't be all we had, and this couldn't be all that was possible. And the need to have some iron-cast reasons to why people should be revolutionaries seemed to be there in Grossman. So yeah, that I think there's an element of, okay, rather than tapping into people's instinct and desire for a different kind of life and different forms of work and seeing that as the basis for revolution, you instead see that the inherent contradictions in the system give you that, and you don't have to appeal to the kind of wishes and aspirations of millions. Instead, it seems more technical and easily identifiable than something that is, I don't know, a little bit less tangible, because there's no demonstrable fact that shows that people around the world want revolution. They may want different kinds of life. That's not quite the same thing. Whereas if the system cannot continue, then that seems to suggest that you'd have to find something else. So there's an element of compulsion in that. I think that's pretty much it. I don't agree with it now, but that was the reason back then.
Yeah, I mean, basically in the first class, we went through a lot of people in the period prior to Grossman who were debating exactly this issue. And just to recall, Edward Bernstein basically constructed this straw man of a purely economic breakdown of capitalism. And if it's not purely economic breakdown of capitalism, then it's just, Kantian morality or, politics or something like that. The way Kautsky put it in his response to Bernstein is, I think it was, Bernstein does not recognize any imminent necessity that doesn't manifest itself as a predicament, right? I think that's interesting. You get the same thing with the modern day followers of Grossman. And I want to, today I try to address that issue of inevitability being something that you predict. If somebody can prove to me inevitability, right? I'm willing to accept the inevitability that all bachelors are unmarried. I'm willing to accept the inevitability of 2 + 2 = 4. But otherwise, when people talk about inevitability, I think they're just, making it up. So I quoted a bit of what Guglielmo Carcati and Michael Roberts said a decade ago. I want to read a little bit more of this. Okay. Some Marxist authors have accepted Heinrich's position that the law of the tendential fall in the rate of profit cannot predict the inevitability of the fall of the rate of profit in the future. Okay, for instance, Kliman et al. And a couple of the et als are here today with us. Nick, also known as Harvey, and Alan Friedman, also known as A. Free. Right. Okay. They continue. This is disastrous for labor's struggle against capital. If we cannot predict the inevitability of the exponential fall in the rate of profit and thus of crises, we deprive labor's right of its objective ground, the recurrent attempt by the system to supersede itself due to its internal contradictions. Labor's fight then, rather than being the conscious manifestation of the system's blind force of self-destruction, becomes a purely voluntaristic act. Kliman and his co-authors' position is harmful for the working class and its fight against capital. I quote this at the end of one of my Grossman pieces, the responses to challenges and questions. And I respond that basically, besides being irrational and mean-spirited, this rant is idiotic and thoughtless. If the weather forecast says that it's very likely to rain, that is not a prediction by any means that rainfall is inevitable. But if I go and grab an umbrella, that's not just a purely voluntaristic act that lacks any objective ground. Okay? Basically, what they've done is to construct, kind of in Bernstein fashion. Grossman goes the same way. You have a mechanical breakdown tendency. You might not have a mechanical breakdown, but I mentioned this last time. The tendency to break down has got to be mechanical, because if it's not mechanical for them, then it's not necessary, then it's not objective or whatever. This is a nutty way of thinking. Okay, if I grab an umbrella, okay, because the weather forecast says it's likely to rain, and I look outside and the clouds are darkening, et cetera, et cetera. This is not a purely objective, a purely subjective whatever that lacks any objective ground. It's not voluntaristic. It's a nutty way of thinking. Okay, so failing to realize that human beings are part of this system, and part of the necessity is the internal necessity of what human beings want, what's necessary for them. If you can't understand that, then you're going to look for these mechanical breakdown tendencies, and you're going to have people and they're going to act, and so it's not necessarily going to be mechanical breakdown, but they're going to be puppets. They're going to be puppets of these external forces. Okay, that's what all these people are saying, except for Bernstein. Bernstein was like, I don't believe that people are the mechanical puppets that you make them out to be. Okay, that's the way he went. I don't know. Do you have anything more to add, Ravi? Stephanie's also got her hand raised. I should do something to ask you to unmute, Stephanie. Ask to unmute. Or hand. Stephanie. Gabriel, can you provide assistance? I'm not sure how to work this.
Absolutely. I also wanted to say, Andrew, it's been now an hour if you wanted to take a bathroom break. And we could play the Who We Are statement.
Oh yeah, I deserve a breakdown today.
You do deserve a breakdown today.
Yeah, let's do a break. Yeah.
All right, let me share the Who We Are statement, and everyone feel free if you also need to go to the bathroom.
Of this capitalist Marxist-Humanist Initiative, or MHI, aims to contribute to the transformation of this capitalist world by projecting, developing, and concretizing the philosophy of Karl Marx and its further development in the Marxist humanism articulated by Raya Dunayevskaya. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and today's many other social, political, and economic crises make this a moment to engage people in discussion of these ideas. In the U.S., we are faced with the threat of Trumpism triumphing, an all-out authoritarianism extinguishing our right to carry on these discussions. Yet at the same moment, the multiracial movement for Black lives has spread to every corner of the country and the world, launching a flood of activism and new ideas that deepen the concept of freedom. MHI is dedicated to the task of proving theoretically that an alternative to capitalism is possible. We are distinguished by our economic analyses in which we do not merely assert but demonstrate that the only opposite to the current world economic system is its abolition and replacement with one not based on the production of, quote, value, close quote. Because capitalism cannot be fundamentally reformed, attempts to reform it lead to an intensification of state capitalism, not to socialism. We are not a political party, nor are we trying to lead the masses who will form their own organization and whose emancipation must be their own act. But we have seen that spontaneous actions alone are insufficient to usher in a new society. We seek a new unity of philosophy and organization in which mass movements striving for freedom lay hold of Marxist philosophy of revolution and recreate society on its basis. Our ideas and actions, as well as our structure and rules, are guided by the interests of working people and freedom movements of people of color, LGBTQ people, other minorities, women, youth, and all those around the world who are struggling for self-determination in order to freely develop their own human natures. We have no interests separate and apart from theirs. To this end, we open our website to the widest possible dialogue with people around the world. We intend to practice as well as espouse a two-way road between our organization and people outside it as essential to developing a single dialectic in the relationship of theory to practice and as the way to assure the survival of Marxist humanism. Please join us.
Okay, let's.
You're able to,
here,
you're in now,
Stephanie.
Stephanie? Oh, perfect. All right.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Hi, I can hear you.
Oh,
Cannot see you.
okay. Thank Marx, as I've learned to say over the years. Thank Marx, not thank God. Thank Marx. Okay, so I will try to stay unmuted. I don't know what my phone's going to do. So what I'm going to say is I've worked a lot with young children over the years, and I grew up, I was born in 57, so that dates me, but there's a TV program that came about in I think it was the mid 60s or so, called Sesame Street. And because I work with young kids, there's some days where certain letters of the alphabet seem to be very prominent. So I like to say today is brought to you by, and I feel like today's class is brought to us a lot by words that start with the letter P. And I would say predictability and possibility and probability and prediction. Oh, I already said that. And then power of the working class, as well as labor power, of course, but power of the working class and others who are not identifying with the bourgeoisie. And there was one other P word. But anyway, getting to around to what I want to say is thanks for the presentation, everybody over the last 3 classes. It's really been a great learning experience. I'm not an expert by any means, but I didn't feel anxiety coming on when I was reading and listening. What I want to say is something that's just kind of general, and that's that I think that a lot of what you're talking about, well, this topic or refuting Grossman has to do with, Andrew, maybe you'll agree, or maybe you've already said it, has to do with a lot with responsibility. Like, it's when somebody's fatalistic and they say, it's going to fall anyway, we'll just wait for that to happen. That's a different a different way of looking at the world than saying something's wrong here and we're not being treated fairly, or this is in unjust, or this is whatever, unfair, and we're going to rise in solidarity and figure out a new way to build a world and to overthrow the system, and a new way to build the world. So I think maybe that, that's a very simple way to get at what Ravi was saying. The question Ravi asked in the after the second class, and what your experience has been, Ravi, over the years, what you've seen, and also what Sebastian was asking about how does what Andrew's talking about fit politically in for Marxist-Humanists, but and friends, but also the world in general. I've had a lot of frustrations over the years dealing with leftists that make me just want to throttle them. Not that I'm into physical violence, but they get me so frustrated because it's all about, I'll hear people say, oh yeah, I'm for revolution, but the devil is in the details. And as soon as somebody says something like that, it makes my fur rise, so to speak. And I know that they're identifying with the bourgeoisie and trying to keep whatever political economic power they themselves are privileged to intact. And I've heard this from that kind of stuff, that kind of response about revolution in particular, or people saying, well, if we just do this, if we just have, what is that program called that a lot of liberals and lefties are into? It has to do with guaranteed income. I think that it's kind of been popular in the Scandinavian countries, the idea or the reality, and also maybe in Germany. And there are people here who try to promote it. I've been an activist in the past for single payer universal health care because I think that's pretty damn vital. But it again is, even that is a reform measure. So I get really frustrated with people that cannot see beyond, okay, well, we'll just do this, or we'll just promote this kind of a program and adjust capitalism to our advantage, to make it a little bit softer, or to make it quote unquote fair for all. And yeah, I'm going to stop there. Over.
Can you read the first 3 or 4 of your P's?
Oh, I'll try. Okay,
You got
let's
predictability, you got possibility.
Okay, let me add probability if I didn't.
Right.
Okay, and political, labor power, there's labor power.
Yeah.
So part of
Right.
Marx, but
Right.
the power of the working class and other folks who are not identifying with the bourgeoisie, and political power, or political change, or political responsibility. Well, responsibility, it's an R word, but I'm throwing that one out there because I feel like it somehow it seems part of an important part of what you're talking about in regards to, I mean, you have the responsibility, you took the responsibility as an economist, a Marxist-Humanist, and an author, and a human being, to put that stuff that you're thinking about out there in a really coherent, understandable way. And you're hoping for, some good change to come about through that. So over.
Right. I think Stephanie's opened up a lot of avenues for discussion here. I'm not going to try to comment on everything. You know, I don't think that anything I'm saying is addressing the problem of people who, like, you know, oh well, you know, socialism sounds wonderful in theory, or, you know, well, revolution would be great, but I don't think any of this discussion has much to do with them, but I could be wrong. But the issues of probability and possibility, you know, and prediction, I've been thinking a lot about that in relationship to, you know, what I was presenting earlier today, partly. The logic of the people who say that, you know, they can predict that something is inevitable. I mean, they should try to, like, learn some modal logic. You don't need much. Actually, you don't need anything formal. You just need to, like, listen to what you're saying. But you know, a lot of people want that assurance of a future, and they want to think that they know things that they can't possibly know, or they want to be able to assert what they don't know. They want, I guess, that right to assert what they don't know. Which I think is just very deleterious. But the other reason, in the last several months, maybe a year or more, I've been thinking a lot about this issue of possibility. I think Marx was a theorist of possibility above all, and that so much of the problems that people have in understanding Marx are a failure to appreciate how thoroughly all of his thinking is rooted in possibility. I mean, like, for instance, his critique of Proudhonism. You know, you open up the Grundrisse, you know, he's got this critique of Darimon, and he says, look, the reason we got to talk about this is so we understand what's possible and not set ourselves impossible tasks. You know, or you have the people who are like, was Marx a theorist of justice, or, you know, why did he say that you know, capitalism is the distribution is the only fair distribution, and why did he say that, like, you know, how could it be just? Wasn't he saying really that it's unjust? And he did think it was unjust, but he said it was just because he didn't want to admit to having any morality, and on and on and on. People are so confused, and I think if you had some, like, grounding in his understanding of possibility and the emergence of new possibilities historically, a lot of these problems would go away. Things that were not possible can be made to become possible. And, you know, this has to do with ethics because, like, you know, well, ought implies can. You can't, most people think you can't say you ought to do this if you can't do it. Well, there's certain things that are not possible under capitalism. So how could they be, you know, issues of justice under capitalism if it's not possible under capitalism? I think, you know, all of that is just, it becomes kind of like not hard once you keep in mind possibility as a category that is uppermost in everything Marx is. I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of things that Marx is talking about. So yeah, I'm always somebody who I just, it's, you know, I don't know whether it's a character defect or whatever. I'm loath to close off possibilities prematurely. I don't like coming to conclusions. I don't like setting methodological strictures. I think possibility is a good thing, but I think that a lot of people, you know, think the other way. You know, let's have certainties. You know, and probability is just basically, as far as I'm concerned, you know, possibility with numbers on it. We've got Ravi. Do you still want to speak? we've got also Dr. Forbin. Let's hear from Dr. Forbin. And Gabriel.
Hey, Andrew, it's Merlin. How are you today?
Hi, you're also Dr. Forbin.
Yes, that's me.
Okay.
Quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Initially in the lecture, you made the statement that C over V is bounded by surplus value, which follows, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's logically, I think, correct. My question is what happens if you throw finance into the situation? Does that change the model at all? Will that create any kind of instability? I mean, what do you think of that if you throw finance into the situation? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in a given country, it can have an effect, just like the kid that gets the allowance, and he divvies up the allowance between gummy bear spending and baseball card accumulation. Now if he taps into his birthday savings, he can temporarily override the limits that, his spending is constrained by his allowance, and if he uses some of the money from when he and his friends knocked over the liquor store, he can temporarily overcome those limits. But where does finance come from? Either it's just creation out of nothing, which to some extent that's it, which is just basically saying we're not going to give you anything that exists, but we're going to, allow you to spend and pay back later. That causes all kinds of financial problems and crises and so forth. But apart from that, to the extent that there is some real value underneath the finance, I mean, what you're doing is one unit of capital is spending more on accumulation, which reduces what another capital has available to spend on accumulation. It's going from one hand to another hand. So I mean, yeah, you can delay the thing more and more. You can create fictitious values, but that runs into trouble. And also, if you look at the system physically, insofar as we're talking about accumulation of means of production, it doesn't matter, how much money you have to spend on means of production if the means of production aren't there. They have to be in existence. So yeah, the thing doesn't operate in lockstep. There were a couple of times, I think, when there were in the late 70s and early 80s, there were very exorbitant shares of surplus value that were accumulated in the United States. And I co-wrote a paper trying to discuss all of that. But basically what we said is, yeah, that existed for a time, but it was not sustainable. And it really had to do with lagging expectations of firms about how much profit was coming in. They expected more profit coming in than did come in. This paper was published in the Cambridge Journal of Economics, I think in 2015, myself and Shannon Williams, and it was called something like Why Financialization Hasn't Depressed U.S. Productive Investment. And that was part of what we did in that paper. So I don't know, is that a satisfactory enough answer for you?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Andrew. I mean, I guess what you're trying to say is basically it's sort of like a Hyman-Minsky type of idea that you're really just, you're creating bubbles, like quantitative easing, and you're kind of pushing off the inevitable. But if you look at it in a long-term basis, I think what you're trying to say, without putting words in your mouth, is that it reverts back to the model which you've presented. Would that be a good take on it?
I don't think I presented any model. I hope I didn't present any model other than the Grossman, Bauer-Grossman
Okay,
model.
all right, that's true. All
right. Actually, I try to be as general as possible, and basically, I said if we look at the process of valuation in as it works in Marx, it's not going to be the case that it can't be the case that the capitalists are actually accumulating more than their surplus value, which is to say, it can't be the case that next period's circulating capital, whatever you want to call it, is bigger than this period's total value of output. Because what's there in the next period has to come from what's produced this period. And I understand that there are issues of foreign trade, there are issues of finance, there's issues of inventories, reserve stocks. So one could say, okay, you got to show me this with those cases being present. I think it can be done. Just it's going to be a little bit more tedious, right? You're not going to be able to show it like on the basis of the same techniques that I was talking about. It's just not plausible that the capitalists are going to continually be investing more profit than they have. I mean, that's really, I think, where what this comes down to. Okay, they don't invest more profit than they have. They might take, they might borrow from other capitalists, but if they're borrowing from other capitalists, and again, I do understand savings and so forth to some extent, but you're drawing on past savings, or else you're creating fictitious values. Yeah, so it's kind of Minsky like, yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Stephanie, your hand's up. Alan, your hand's up. You want to speak?
Oh, go for Alan first.
Okay. Oh, wait. Ravi, do you want to speak? Waiting a while if that's the case.
No, I'm good. I can't take my hand down, I don't think, but I'm okay.
Okay. So then, Stephanie, you say let's go to Alan. Okay, let's go to Alan.
Yeah, just the way to take your hand down is either you've got a big screen, in which case you have a thing called reactions at the bottom of the screen, and you click reactions, and one of the options is lower hand. In fact, it should show up as a little yellow button anyway. If you don't see that, then you click on a little thing with dots that says more, and in there is reactions, and that's how you lower your hand. I just wanted to try and come in on, well, I wanted to ask a question and then make a point. The question is, okay, it's important to understand why the Grossmanites are interested in this question, right? But why are we interested in it? I feel that we're not just interested in it in order to refute the Grossmanites. So are there any other reasons to be interested in it? Let me put it in this open-ended way. Are there any other reasons to be interested in the issues that the Grossmanites raise, or more generally, Marxist theory of reproduction? other than refuting the Grossmanites, and I'd like to hear Andrew's take on that. Then I just want to come in on the question that Ravi raised, and I do want to suggest there's another reason that people, the Grossmanite, the fatalists, are interested, which is that they want to be the people who have a monopoly on interpreting Marx correctly. And this is therefore a very typical phenomenon amongst groups of Marxists, which can be academic or they can be, political groups, which present themselves as if there is only one way to break down, and there's only one road to Marx, and it is through me. It's a sort of Christian, without wishing to offend anybody, but it's they present themselves as the Christians of Marxism, that we are the path to Marxism. And I think that what the three owls, hey, you can call me Owl, the three et als that Andrew talked about had a different view, which is that what we were trying to do, and I think we have to some extent succeeded in doing, is ensuring that people can find Marx in their own way, that people can read Marx. There are a set of rules of evidence that allow you to work out what Marx really was, or to choose between ways of interpreting Marx, and so for it's a liberatory project. We're not saying, I don't think nobody in TSSI ever said, come to us because we are the true Marxists, although people like David Laidman interpreted us as saying that. He wrote a piece in our very first book in which he called us the new orthodox Marxists. So we're not the new orthodox Marxists. We're just people who think that there is a way that anybody out there can find Marx without somebody standing in the way and saying, I am the true interpreter of Marx. You can only come to Marx through me. And if you try any other thing, it's not going to work. Then there's one more thing about inevitability, which is that I think in the early days of the socialist movement, what people wanted was not so much to prove that capitalism would break down, but that socialism was inevitable. So there's a whole bunch of literature which is particularly prevalent in the Marxism of the Stalin period in the USSR, which is all about socialism's inevitable. So I'm going to be very heretical. My answer to Ravi is socialism is a choice. I don't see anything wrong in saying you have a choice. The question is, what are the reasons for the choice? The reasons for the choice is that socialism would be nicer, right? Socialism would give the human race more freedom. It would give vast mass of people access to things that they don't have access to now. It would probably save the planet. I'm not going to say it would inevitably solve the planet, and I'm certainly not going to say without socialism the planet is inevitably doomed. But in terms of Andrew's putting up an umbrella if you think it's going to rain argument, it's a safer bet if you want to save the planet to try for socialism. So there's a ton of reasons for trying for socialism other than the inevitable breakdown of capitalism. The problem is that if you say the breakdown of capitalism is not inevitable, then people can say it's not a problem. I mean, this is what the inevitabilists want. They don't want there to be a possibility other than socialism. They don't want to recognize the reality of human choice. The reason I share with Andrew the intense dislike of fatalism and the attachment to possibility is if something is merely possible, then we have a choice. So then we are free, and freedom was Marxist, in my opinion, fundamental goal was liberation. So that's sort of my reason for saying, yes, we do have a choice. What we do need, though, is to know what the choice is. And we can never know perfectly, but it helps to know what it might mean if we just say we're going to opt for capitalism. And Marx was interested in that question. He says, there are certain historical tendencies you can observe in capitalism that suggests that the results are going to be very unpleasant for us. And most of them are borne out by experience. If you look at what's happening with capitalism, poverty is still the lot, and a famine and the lot of most of the world. The destructive tendencies of capitalism are everywhere, obvious and confronting us. So that I think Marx's not presentation of the inevitable laws of capitalism, but his analysis of its historical tendency is a valuable guide when we make choices. And my answer to Ravi is and the RCP, I don't see anything wrong in saying we make choices. It's a damn good thing to make choices. The problem is to know what the choice is, as I see it. So my question was, why should we study Grossman?
Well, right. Let me come back on the last one first. You sound, I don't mean to be flippant and I don't mean to be insulting. You sound just like Edward Bernstein. I mean, really, very much like him. You don't mean it, I don't think. The problem is when one operates with it's either necessary or it's a choice. One gets boxed into an either or. I don't know how far that kind of thinking takes us. I don't want to. I mean, I think I could think my way through this, but I haven't fully yet. But I don't want to get boxed into saying, you know, well, it's not inevitable, therefore it's a choice. There are things like necessity, and I think Kautsky was quite right. He said, you know, the way that Bernstein thinks of necessity, you know, imminent economic necessity, he says it's not like a predicament, you know, then there's no necessity. It's all contingent. It's all accidental. It's all free in the kind of like uncaused sense of free. I'm not real happy with that. I'll tell you, I don't know why we should be caring about Grossman. I'm not even sure, you know, like why to care about issues of reproduction, except, you know, you want to be able to understand capitalism well and so forth. But I don't have any like particular thing like of a David Harvey nature, you know, like, okay, these are the issues right now as to how capital circulates, and that's like important because people are being ripped off by their phone companies and stuff. I don't want to say anything like that. For me, the Grossman stuff was this. I knew for decades that the Grossman stuff didn't work, but I didn't, you know, I can't read German, and there was not until very recently a complete English translation of Grossman. And I needed to confirm with Rick Kuhn that what I had read in the abridged English Grossman was everything that Grossman said in his third chapter with the modifying counter tendencies. That was the totality of how he modified the Bauer-Grossman model to account for the fact that per unit values of commodities are not constant. Okay, so very shortly before the unabridged English version came out, I got, you know, from Rick Kuhn, I got the text of, you know, he sent me the text, and I was able to see, and there was nothing there that was new. From a theoretical vantage point, there was more elaboration and so forth, but nothing new. So at that point, you know, and being of advanced years, frankly, advanced years, and I don't have the some of the capabilities I used to have. I said, look, it's like now or never. I got to do this, so let me just do it. So I don't know, you know, I didn't have any like particular things in mind of a political nature or theoretical nature of this moment or anything like that. It was just, you know, here is something I can do. I don't know that other people know this. I don't know that they could do it. So it's my responsibility. Let me make sure that I do this while I still can. Does Stephanie want to come back? Nick has his hand raised.
We can go for Nick first, because I already asked or said something, so I can wait.
Okay, Sebastian wrote into the chat. He says he's sorry he has to leave. He agrees with Alan's last statement. I'm not sure exactly which statement that was. Alan made several statements. Maybe it's the whole of it. And Sebastian says, I want to believe that people who, excuse me, strike that. Sebastian says, I believe that people who want to create their own Marx or be the true Marx's disciples are not following Marx in a crucial statement. Make science. Greetings to all. Does anybody know what he's referring to? Make science? Where Marx said that? I don't know that. It might be a translation issue. I'm not sure. Okay, so we've got Stephanie, we've got Nick, and we've got A. Free, who's Alan. Oh, on the Bernstein issue. Who wants to go?
Well, I don't mind.
Yeah, why don't you?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like when we were talking, listening to you talking about this, listening to Alan talking about it, and it strikes me that a lot of, there seems to be a great similarity to the way that people think about the environment, because we have a lot of fatalism on one side with technology is going to solve the problem for us so we don't have to do anything as people. And then we have on the other side, obviously people saying, well, we have to fundamentally change, the way we live. And I'm going to tell you about how we're going to fundamentally change the way that we live. And unless we all live like this, then it's going to break down. And so I see a lot of fatalism when I either thinking that the problem will be solved itself by technology, or that if you just identify the extent of the problem and how people are going to change their behavior, a fatalism about how society can change without recognizing all of the other barriers in place. And in a sense, I would suggest very pessimistically in a sense that when you have the idea that there is no inevitability to the breakdown of the system, no matter how imperfect or bad it gets for people, that informs us on the environment, that there's absolutely no necessity for anything to be done about climate change if unless it's recognized, unless people stop capitalism, they're not going to address the problem. Unless people get up and do something about it, it's not as if everybody's going to suddenly accept, oh, we're all going to become vegetarian because somebody says we need to, or we'll invent a machine to make meat and it'll all be all right. I just sort of see the fatalism and a sort of a parallel between what we're talking about perhaps with the whole environmental question, and that in a sense perhaps is one of the reasons why we should be talking about notions of change and people's actions in change, is because obviously with the environmental challenge that seems to be where it's going to come up. And I just wanted to make another couple of observations in terms of people just hanging on to ideas. Well, people hang on to the idea that Grossman was trying to disprove, in the idea of Rosa Luxemburg's need for external source of demand to allow reproduction to continue. And no matter how many times that's proved wrong or not logical, people want to hang on to it because it's a position that they like politically. So it's a sort of a sense of a lack of vigor, in the same sense of people saying, wouldn't it be nice if everybody did this to solve the climate, without realizing well, you have to go through like political struggles and social change if you're going to do it. They were just some of the vague thoughts I was having on it, Andrew. I don't know what you might think about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that last point really strikes home. I mean, it strikes home for every anti-fascist in the United States, because of the crisis we're living through of people believing what they want to believe. On Radio Free Humanity, the most recent segment is with a couple of philosophers, epistemologists. I mean, basically talking about bad thinking and people, believing things because they want it to be true. And they go not only into what's logically wrong with that, they go into what's morally wrong with that. And we had some very interesting discussion about the ethics of belief, and what it is that people mean when they say they believe something. And we're in the United States. We were in for a shock just a couple of weeks ago. The person who's third in line for the presidency. So if the president and the vice president get, incapacitated or whatever, this guy, the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, that nobody had ever heard of before he became Speaker of the House. I mean, really, experts didn't know who he was. He's a Christian nationalist. He's a young earth creationist. In other words, the Bible says it's only a few thousand years old, the earth. He claims to believe that. He's done legal work for this Ark encounter and the Creationist Museum, and you can go onto the Ark and you can see models of the dinosaurs who were on the Ark with Noah, right? So it's all very fully formed, not the product of evolution. I mean, and this guy says, "Oh yeah, no, there's no separation between church and state in the U.S. Constitution. It's there to enable the church from being, like constrained by the state." And we got election denialism up the yin yang, conspiracy theorists up the yin yang, and I reflect on everything and like how hard it's been, and this, Nick, and this, Alan, how hard it's been to convince the people of the simplest things regarding like what Marx said, whether it's right or wrong, and just like, it's sort of like, well, they think they're entitled to believe it because, well, that's what they believe, and that's fine. But this kind of way of thinking, I believe, is helping to run civilization into an immense crisis. It has to do with climate and as well, and just the denial of climate change and everything. It's, the people who say that this is built into human evolution, and I think they're right. The question is, can we overcome our natural tendencies through evolution and think differently? And there's people in psychology talking about this. There's Kahneman. What's Kahneman's first name? The psychologist. Amos Tversky and something Daniel Kahneman. And Kahneman talks about system one thinking and system two thinking. They're not really systems, but it's like system one thinking is instinctual, it's reactive, it's easy, it's fast. And he says that's the go-to for people, including him, including me, including you. But, you can do it the other way. You can think slowly, carefully, rigorously, and it could be overridden. And I think that that's what we need to do. And, this links up with Marx saying in the Communist Manifesto, all the old frozen fixed relations, are tottering, and the time has come for people to face with sober senses, the nature of their kind and the relations with one another. And I think we need that, facing with sober senses now. more than ever. And if people don't think it's class politics, but something else, I'm sorry for them. I think we really need this. I mean, we don't need faith. Okay, we need testing of ideas. And all kinds of faith are really, really harmful in my view, because what they're meant to do is to shield off that testing. But the testing is the only way we can separate the wheat from the chaff and move forward. It's as simple as that. Stephanie, Gabriel. Stephanie,
Okay,
Gabriel, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, Gabriel, do you want to participate because you haven't had a chance yet?
Yeah, I want to jump in quick, Stephanie. So I'll go. Because I just wanted to say to what Andrew was just getting at, that to bring it back to the Grossmanites and the Grossman conversation, I think it's very telling and must be combated, the sort of bad well, I guess like Andrew was saying, it's not just bad faith, it's in a lot of ways all faith-based argumentation, right? But of people like Mike Johnson, it must be combated, but it's to be expected from them. But we're talking about so-called, as Stephanie was getting at earlier, so-called fellow radicals who are saying that they're engaging in conversations and dialogues that are supposed to get us beyond these things into a better, to creating a better tomorrow. And they're doing it in incredibly faith-based ways, and in just they're laundering their views in Grossman, and they're laundering Grossman's views in Marx, and they're not willing to I would have a lot more respect for these people if they were willing to say, as Alan was getting at before, I disagree with Marx. This is what I think. It's not in Marx. It's something new, and this is what it is. And then we can, but they won't say that. They won't have honest discourse. They launder all these views, and they're supposed to be better than that. And to mention a great article Ravi wrote years ago about I believe it's called something along the lines of how to engage in principled revolutionary debate. There's none of that. That's not happening, right? And so we should be expecting better, but we don't get it. We're all functioning the same way as Mike fucking Johnson, right? And we're supposed to be better than that. So that's really all I was thinking and hearing what Andrew was saying. I mean, the left and radicalism and faith in a better tomorrow is supposed to be the thing that people turn to when everything in society is becoming like Mike Johnson, and everything is election-based denial, and everything's crumbling, and people are just being screwed over and looking for answers. And they turn to a corner of discourse and dialogue and tradition that is supposed to provide answers and reason and dialogue about how to solve it. And it's the same BSing and nonsense and ways of talking with each other. No wonder people don't take it seriously. No wonder people try it, look at and check out and give up. Suck.
We got Stephanie, and we got some chat comments from A Free, also known as Alan Freeman, and Seth Mobile, who is Seth Automobile. You want to go, Stephanie?
Sure. So I just want to add to the P words today, the phrase poverty of philosophy, and the words people, pollution, Palestine. Those are all things that are floating around in my mind that also start with P. But I have two questions that came up. One came up really early on in your presentation, Andrew, when you said that, and I am no software expert, but I would think that if software does get outdated, wouldn't that be a form of depreciation? And then the other question that I have is how, because you were talking about a huge increase in surplus value during a certain historical period in the US, how real or theoretical or whatever it's called, formulaic terms, is that surplus value determined, and how is it recorded, and how would you and other economists have access to that kind of data? Because it I don't know. I mean, like, how is it measured, and where is it recorded, and all that kind of stuff. And if there's no time to get to this today, I'm sure I'll learn it later. But I'm just,
could you repeat the second question?
Sure. That had to do with when you were talking about that big increase in surplus value during a certain historical period in the United States. I'm wondering where you got, I mean, not questioning your validity, but I don't know, where would one get that information? How is it measured in, quote unquote, real terms in the market, or in,
okay.
GDP statistics, whatever. Okay, over.
Right. Okay. First of all, the question about software. What I said was, in my example there with the 6 graphs, I got some fixed capital that does not physically depreciate.
Oh.
As an example of fixed capital that does not physically depreciate, I said software. Okay. Software does not physically depreciate. The code continues to exist. Even if the database where it's stored is wiped out, the code exists. Okay. I mean, so it never physically depreciates. It does depreciate, but that's not depreciation due to wear and tear. It's not physical depreciation. It's what Alan Freeman is very famous for telling us is moral depreciation. And the meaning of the term moral, well, he can tell us about that. I think that big increase that I showed you was an increase in the rate of inflation. But it doesn't matter. All of the data for inflation, for surplus value, which they call profit, in the United States, it all comes from the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis. It is the absolutely best database for nationwide economic statistics in the world. It's the most complete in terms of the different things that it measures, in terms of the length of time that it goes back. And I tend to distrust stuff from other countries, and it's piecemeal and it's problematic. The national income and product accounts of the Bureau of Economic Analysis are much fuller. So if you talk about surplus value, well, of course, they call it profit, but in Marxist theory, the total profit is equal to the total surplus value. So if you're looking at the nationwide level, profit is equal to surplus value. Now you get like all kinds of different measures of profit. They got a lot of them. So you got to look at like what's most relevant to your particular question and the answer to that question. If you want to know more, I can tell you more, but I don't think you're looking to do any kind of measurement yourself right now. It's a different kind of question. Okay, so I think I answered both of those. Let me read out the discussion from. Yeah, go ahead, it's Stephanie. Okay, we have A. Free Allen, who says, to avoid sounding like Bernstein, one could say our objective is to achieve human freedom. However, it is not possible to obtain freedom if our actions are determined by a necessity external to us. Okay, one could say all of that. To me, this is the key feature of the fatalists. They are basically positivists, which means you think everything we do is externally conditioned. So as I interpret what Alan is saying, we could say our objective is to achieve freedom, but if we think that our actions are determined by external necessity, completely determined by external necessity, then you can't achieve freedom. And that's what he thinks is a key feature of the fatalist, this belief that our actions are completely determined by external necessity. Yeah, I think that's right. And Seth Mobile says regarding A. Free's comment on human freedom, R. Raya wrote in Marxism and Freedom, a book of the late 1950s, quote, she wrote, "The development of capitalism itself creates the basis of a new humanism. The new forces and new passions which will reconstruct society on new, truly human beginnings." New forces and new passions is a quote from Marx in chapter 32 of volume 1 of Capital. Historical tendency of capitalist accumulation. The new forces and new passions which will reconstruct society on new, truly human beginnings, quote, "a society in which the full and free development of every individual is the ruling principle." That might be from the Communist Manifesto, or it might be from something else. It is because Marx based himself on this humanism, more popularly called the inevitability of socialism, that he could discern the law of motion of capitalist society, the inevitability of its collapse. Okay, no collapse, not breakdown. A. Freeman says, "I'm afraid I have to leave." At 2, this has been a great session. Thanks to MHI team in the audience. Look for the next session. Yeah, first of all, with respect to collapse, breakdown, I don't think there's any issue there. The German word that like Bernstein and Grossman and Luxemburg were using could be translated, collapse could be translated breakdown. I think the issue is it a purely economic breakdown or collapse? Okay, what Dunayevskaya is doing is saying the inevitability of socialism is not due to some purely economic, external, mechanistic process, but it's the new humanism. You know, this new forces and passions for human new beginnings, the principle of a free development of every individual, that's part of the whole complex is going on, that's going on. And that's what makes it inevitable. Okay. And that's what will be, you know, behind the breakdown of or collapse of capitalism. I think that's the argument there. So there is, it's not this mechanical, you know, wind up doll kind of inevitability, you know. And of course that inevitability is contingent. I mean, you know, it's if we have that, it's conditional. If we have that, then it becomes inevitable. You know, the people who believe in inevitability are not going to like a conditional inevitability. They want an inevitable inevitability, right? Okay, now Alan likes the distinction between breakdown and collapse. Get into that. I'm not sure I know the difference, but and he says, ultimately, breakdown theory is a form of reification of the market, which it shares with neoclassical thinking. It converts the market, a human creation, into an agent external to humans, a causatory agency in its own right. Let me ask, what is the distinction between breakdown and collapse? Yeah, Alan, Seth, Stephanie. Why don't you go, Seth?
All right, so it is possible that it's the same word in German. I'm not sure about that, but I think your distinction is more important. That it's, you know, this isn't the Grossmanite fatalist, the capitalist production process will cause its own breakdown on its own, you know, circulation of capital. But I think that with all the discussion of inevitability, it is interesting that Dunayevskaya says these things so starkly, because what she is talking about, I think, if she does mean something positive by inevitability here, then the overthrow of capitalism or the initiation of a new socialist mode of production is necessary. I mean, is contingent upon theoretical points in Marx's theory, like the centrality of the proletariat as a class, as a revolutionary class, since his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right and all that. But yes, I think they're making different arguments and it can take a long time to discuss, but those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, she's using very old language and very old, oppositions and categories, and just like wrenching them, and giving them a meaning very different from the standard one. But she wrote that in the late 50s. I remember her saying much closer to when she died in the late 80s, we shouldn't talk about inevitable. That's why we don't talk about the coming American Revolution, or the inevitable American Revolution. We talk about the needed American Revolution. So I think she got more sensitive to, how people were taking what was being said. Alan, do you want to come back on this issue of breakdown versus collapse?
Well, I mean, there was a very kind of subjective reaction, right? So I'm not putting out there a great theory of the distinction, but to me, a collapse is a social phenomenon. The society ceases to function. There are many societies that have collapsed that didn't have markets. Roman civilization collapsed, the decline and fall, right, of the Roman Empire. Okay, there are countless civilizations in history which have just, fallen apart under the weight of their own contradictions. That's a social thing. But what I think is very specific about the whole breakdown tradition, I think this is in Luxembourg as well, is they substitute for an analysis of the sort of the effects of class struggle and the kind of society that capitalism produces. They substitute for that the mechanical agency of the market. So they're fetishizing, or I'm not sure which reifying, probably both, but they're making the market into as if it was a beast in its own right. It's not a beast in its own right. We built it, we can take it down. So the reason I like the distinction between breakdown and collapse is the way that maybe the word breakdown has been hijacked. Maybe that's what the Grossmanites and the Luxemburgers have done, but they've converted it into some fetishization of the market as if the market was the only agency and sits outside what humans themselves decide to do. That's why I had that subjective reaction. It's not, as I say, I'm not elevating it into a great new theory.
Right. We've got a comment from T. Dostler, Torolf Dostler. And he's a native German speaker, and he says breakdown and collapse can be used synonymously as Zusammenbruch, but breakdown can be used in the sense of mechanical failure. Whereas I guess collapse cannot, except that like somebody's lungs can collapse.
A building can.
A building can collapse. Yeah, that's true. A building, that's an easier one. Yeah. So let me ask, Torolf, if you wanted to say collapse, but make clear that it's not a breakdown, and you were speaking German, how would one do that? We need to end there.
Yeah, he may have left because we're down
2
2
hours.
people.
Yeah, but we're also over time. Never overstay your welcome, because you'll never be welcome to stay over. Zusammenbruch. So there's only one word. Okay. I think that's what. Okay.
Well, let me thank everybody for coming. It was a very exciting session, I think, about all kinds of real reality things, as well as the theory, which was quite amazing from the first class on. So we're going to have a tape of, or a video of it on YouTube. The first 2 are already there, so you can take a look or point your friends to them. And I don't know how long it'll take to get this one up, but Gabriel, do you have any estimate?
Hopefully, by Tuesday, latest Tuesday afternoon.
Okay. And then,
So have it on our website in the article on the classes.
I mean, a link to it. Yeah.
It'll be an embedded thing,
Right.
so you can watch it from our page.
And if anyone wants to write anything, write up their comments or write up new comments on this class, feel free to do that and send it to us for our print publication. Oh, Francisco's gone away. Okay. So again, it was quite exciting. Thank you to Andrew, but also to everybody else, Nick, Alan, Sebastian, etc. And let's continue talking, because that's the only way we're going to get to truth about anything, is to continue talking. The MHI people and invited guests are going to have an annual conference on December 2nd and 3rd. And we'll invite the rest of you, if you're interested in coming, write to us at our email address and tell us that you want to come, and we'll be back in touch with you about that. Is there anything else you want to say, Andrew?
No, there's some more discussion. When is the next one? More on Zusammenbruchs theory, Einsatz. We're getting into stuff, but yeah, I don't know if I got anything more to say about Grossman. So the next one is like, not only when is the next one, but is there next one? What is the next one? There's all kinds of next one questions. So, we should be in touch. Alan had mentioned, this idea of doing, not MHI doing, but like him and me and others doing sessions on value theory, like, maybe by Zoom or whatever. We all just need to be in touch and work things out. Nothing's planned at this point.
Okay.
The next one is not inevitable.
Not inevitable, no.
And probably not even probable, as we got so many other irons in the fire these days. But it was a great series, and we thank everyone for their contributions.